Hello, everyone. So we are in the second lecture on adult taxonomy, adult ordinate taxonomy. Welcome all to the Dragonfly South Asia Virtual Meeting 2020. Today is the second lecture in the series, which will be delivered by Parag Rangnekar along with Prosenjit Dawn. So let me take a few minutes to introduce Parag and Prosenjit. Parag is a postgraduate in agriculture. He is a member of the Goa State Biodiversity Board, and he has been working on ordinate diversity of Goa for over a decade. He has documented over 50 new records and two new species to science from the state of Goa. He is a very close member of Dragonfly South Asia, one of the admins of the group, and he has been contributing a lot in our yearly activities. And we look forward to always, all the participants are always eager to listen to Parag's lecture on the field identification of ordinates. It's a golden opportunity for all of you guys here. So I don't take much time now. I can directly switch on the screen sharing mode. And over to you, Parag. You can share your screen so that we are all here and eager to listen to you. So I'll be on standby mode, but you both, Prasenjit and Parag, you both can take control. Okay, I'm going to share Parag's screen now. If you have any comments in between, you can. If you have any comments, you can add in the Facebook comments. Parag and Prasenjit are here, so they will be helping you with the comments. Over to you, Parag. You can start.
Yes. Thank you so much, Pankaj. And so, is my screen visible, Pankaj?
Yeah, it is visible, Parag. You can go ahead.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. So, good evening, everyone. I'm Parag, based out of Goa, and like Pankaj said, I've been working for over a decade on ordinate diversity. What I'm going to speak to you about today is primarily, and it's an introduction to the adult ordinate taxonomy. It's quite complex actually, and it's quite a bit of practice. It's a little frustrating at times, but it's fun nevertheless. Um, Let me start with a disclaimer saying that I'm not an expert and I don't claim to be one. I'm learning every day. Recently saw some comparative slides that Vivek had made on the group, and they taught me a lot. Um, this attempt primarily is to help you in understanding various characters that ordinates have, and which will actually probably help you in field identification as well. During the lockdown time now, there is quite a bit of time with all of us, so we have a lot of images, stock images, which I sit and kind of skim through, and then you suddenly end up seeing something, and then trying to look at it more closely, and then you look at some of your old images. So I'm going to through the slides run through different characters of odonates that you need to look at in your images, which will probably help you to zero down to at least the family level, if not the genus. So with this, let me move ahead now. Pankaj is actually guilty of already using some of the slides and discussing some of the the issues that, or rather the points that I was supposed to cover. But I think there's no harm in duplication, because and we all are learning. So everybody knows how to differentiate between a dragonfly and a damselfly. Dragons are obviously with a little robust bodies. Damselflies are slender. The position of the wings is another giveaway. But from somebody who looks at dragonflies, very closely, it's important to look beyond just the shape and size. How do the taxonomists, how do the books separate dragonflies and damselflies, is what we will see now. This was discussed yesterday, but a little closer look today. This is how the head of the dragonfly and damselfly will look up close. On the left, you have a typical dragonfly where the eyes, as you see it, are touching each other, whereas in case of the damselflies, the eyes are completely separated. So this is one of the key points to remember when you are trying to differentiate between the dragonfly and the damselfly. The next is, of course, the wing shape and size. In case of damselflies, and it's very clearly visible here that the wings are of the same shape and size. Whereas in case of the dragonfly, the wings are variable in shape. Usually the hind wing, and here you will see it at the base, is quite broad. Okay, so this is the forewing and the hind wing are different in shape and size in case of the dragonflies. You've already seen this again yesterday. This is how a dragonfly nymph looks, and this is how a damselfly nymph will look. And Prasanjit obviously is going to speak in detail about this, and I mean he's very good with it, and he'll be able to probably identify many of the species and genus just by looking at the exuve. A general characters of a typical dragonfly, all dragonflies and damselflies as well have 10 abdominal segments, and what you see at the end are the cerci or the anal appendage, superior anal appendage and the inferior appendages. On your left is a typical dragonfly head with the compound eyes, where the laser pointer is that's called the occiput. That's the top of the head, and these are all the different. This is called the frons, the postclapias, mandibles. All these words are important when you are actually running through the identification keys, because the colors on it actually are in many cases identification characters, and we will see some of pictures as we go ahead. This is again how a typical damselfly will look, and here you can very clearly see that the eyes are well separated. Let me go to the next, and this is the leg of a dragonfly and a damselfly. Both will have these very sharp, fine spines, which help them to catch their prey. This is how a typical dragonfly, a wing will look, and all those. It looks pretty scary, but all those short forms are the names of different nerves that pass through the wing, and in many cases, in most cases rather, they help you in at least finding the species up to the genus level. Similarly, you have the wing of a damselfly, and then we will look at it further. How some of these wing venations matter. Now this I think slides were discussed yesterday, so I'm not going to ask these questions again. We all already know that it is the same species. The one on the top is the male, and the one below is the female. Now this species is called the river heliodor. Okay, and so dragonflies exhibit what we call sexual dimorphism. Male and the females in most look different. So how do you tell them apart? Just colors is not enough. So we have another slide here where you see the pied paddy skimmer. On the right we have the male, and on the left we have the female. Now how do I know that the one on the right is the male and on the left is the female? For which we have to look closely at two different characters. One is this. The end of the abdomen is where you see the anal appendages. Now, in case of the male, what you see here, where the laser is pointed, are the anal appendages, which in most cases, in case of the male, are long, whereas in case of the female, they are short. Okay, so this is one way of knowing which is the male and the female. Okay, but in some cases, it can be misleading. It can confuse you, especially if it is like this. Okay, if you go by what I said earlier, that the female anal appendages are shorter, Now here you see the same species again. On the left you have the male, and on the right you have the female. Now in case of the female, the anal appendages are long here as well. So sometimes this can get confusing, but the best way to separate a male and the female is by looking at the second abdominal segment. Where my cursor is pointed, or the laser is pointed, is the second abdominal segment, where in case of the male, it has the secondary genitalia, whereas in case of the female, it does not have. So this is one sure shot method of separating the male and the female. Let's not go by colors or any other characters that people tell us. This probably is the best confirmatory test to differentiate between the male and the female. Right. So, like I said earlier, wing venations are very, very important. Now, let's quickly look at some of the important terms. When it comes to wing venation, everybody knows this. This is the wing spot or the pterostigma, the function of which was discussed yesterday. Many dragonflies have bicolorous pterostigma. That means they have two colors. The shape and size also helps us in identification. This side is called the base of the wing, okay, and this is the node. This top is called the costa, and then this is called the subcosta, and all these perpendicular ones are called the nervures. Now, do you see this triangle? This triangle is called the discoidal cell, and in many cases helps us in grouping dragonflies and damselflies as we I will show you as we go ahead. This is called the anal triangle, and it's usually divided, okay, into 3 cells or 2 cells, and that is another character. This line that you see, this one in the hind and the forewing, is called the arc. Now all these terms, arc, costa, subcosta, node, pterostigma, discoidal cell, all these are important terms in terms of when you're looking at the different characters on a wing. I know this can get a little overwhelming at times, all these terms and all, and the kind of format that we have now, I have no idea of knowing how many people have understood and how many have not. So kindly excuse that, but as we go ahead, probably it will start getting a little more easier. And this is the most important part of a dragonfly, the anal appendage, because this is where the species can be identified. And of course, there are many species where the anal appendages also look pretty similar, and we will discuss one example and a couple of examples actually as we go ahead. But this is one character which is very, very important for species level identification. Okay, looking at this is the dorsal side of the anal appendage. Now, can you see the black spots here where the cursor is pointed? They look like white spots when you look at them dorsally. But if you look at them laterally, you will see that they are very sharp tooth-like structures. So it's very important to look at the anal appendages of a dragonfly and a damselfly not only dorsally but laterally as well. It's very, very important for looking at all the different characters. Okay, now I think the Anisoptera Zygoptera thing was discussed yesterday, and Anisoptera basically means that the forewing and the hindwing are different in shape and size. So now we will quickly discuss some of the the families of dragonflies and look at some of their important characters. Now stay with me here. It's very, very interesting, but can be confusing, but pay attention, please. Right. Now, there are quite a few families, but we are looking at the common ones because this is not really a hardcore taxonomy lecture or a tutorial, but I have put the heads of 3 different families, very different in the shape of their eye. So on the right hand side, you have the Libellulidae family, where the eyes meet at a point. In case of the Aeschyinid family, the eyes are, they are confluent on top of the head. Whereas in case of gomphids or the club tails, the eyes are separated. Okay, so it's just not damselflies where the eyes are separated. In case of damselflies, the eyes are widely separated. But in case of club tails, the eyes are separated. So if you see a dragonfly where the eyes are separated, you immediately know that it is from the Gomphidae family. Okay, so these are important characters to club different groups into different dragonflies into families. Now the same families, now look at the discoidal cell. If you remember, this is what I said. This is called the discoidal cell. Now in case of the Gomphidae family, the discoidal cells are entire. Okay. Can you see this? And they are nearly of the same shape and size. Whereas in case of the Libellulidae, the one in the forewing and the hind wing are different in shape and size. Okay. Whereas in case of the Aeschynids or the Darners, the hindwing and the forewing discoidal cell is nearly of the same shape and size, but they have nervures in between. It is subdivided. Okay, so these are important characters to look at, and by just looking at the wing venation, you should be able to say, or the characters of the wing, you should be able to say which family it belongs to. So this is something that is very interesting. So please look at all your pictures that you have, on your laptop, and just look at the wings and try and find out which family they belong to. Okay, now this is how the characters are read. Now in case of the Gomphidae family, like I said earlier, eyes are widely separated, and the discoidal cell in forewing and the hindwing are unequal, and they're not subdivided. Okay, that's very, very important. That is in case of the Gomphids. Audible, everybody? Pankaj, Prasanjit? Hello?
Yeah, Parag, you are quite
Yes,
audible.
yes,
Clear
yes.
and loud.
Yes.
Go on.
Okay. Okay. Now these are the characters of the Aeschynids or the Darners. Now here, like I said earlier, discoidal cell is nearly of the same shape and size in both the wings, but it's traverse. That means it's subdivided. Okay, and the costal and the subcostal antenodal nervures. Now, and these are called the antenodal nervures. Can you see the laser pointer? And then there are small ones below. Now they don't coincide in case of Aeschynids. Okay, so these are some of the characters which is how this is basically what we call taxonomy, okay, of grouping the organisms based on their characters. Now this is the most widely distributed family, Libellulidae, and very common. Now here, read this. It says that the discoidal cells differ in shape and size in the hindwing and the forewing, and the costal and the subcostal nervures, they coincide. Okay, this is another very important character. And their thorax, that you must have seen in most of the Libellulidae family, are not metallic. Okay, so uh, these are the characters of the Libellulidae family. Now there are a couple of more families that we will speak of. This is Cordulidae. Now I cannot show you, unfortunately, the tibia of the male here. Okay, but look at the two other characters. The thorax, it says, is metallic. Okay, in this case, it's either green or brown. It's got very metallic colors. And the base of the hind wing, if you see here, is not angulated. Okay, now what angulated means, I'll show you in the next slide. Can you see this arrow here? Look at this angle. Okay, this is called angulated. Okay, so let me go back again and show you here. This is rounded. Okay, this is not angulated. Okay, it is either rounded or it is shallowly notched. There is a small notch, but it's not angulated. So if you see these characters, that the thorax is metallic and the hind wing is not angulated, in all probability it belongs to the Cordulidae family. Whereas if the thorax is metallic and the base of the hind wings is angulated, then it in all probability belongs to the Macromidae family. Okay, so this is a couple of characters that you should look at. And something interesting, again, in case of Cordulidae, the eyes are not as connected as in case of the macromidae. Okay, so if you have a picture which shows you the eye or the top of the head, then you should be able to see this as well. Okay, so this is how you separate these two beautiful looking groups, Cordulidae, which includes Idionyx, and Macromidae, which includes Macromia. Okay, so now let me go to the suborder Zygoptera, that is the damselflies, where the wings are of same shape and size. Now,
Pratha,
yes,
hello.
sorry,
One thing I will add. So you
yes,
told about the wing base that will be angulated or rounded. So
yes,
please mention that in case of female also, some genus they have rounded wing edge, but in case of male it will be angulated. So they should be careful
correct,
about the sex before going for the
correct,
character.
correct, correct. Absolutely. Thank you, Prasenjit. Now, unfortunately, like it or not, most of the keys, have been developed based on the male characters. I think again this was discussed yesterday, but like what Prasenjit said, in case of the females of Macromidae, the base of the hind wing need not necessarily be angulated. It could be rounded. Thank you, Prasenjit. Okay, so let me come to the damselflies or Zygoptera. Now, this is very interesting. They can be the entire damselfly group can be divided into two sets. Okay, based on these antenodal nervures. Now, like I said earlier, and I'll say it again, this is called the base of the wing near the thorax, and this is the node. And in between the costa and the subcosta, what we see are the antenodal nervures. So basically, the nervures before the node are the antenodal nervures, and the nodes after the node are the postnodal nervures. So these are the antenodal nervures. Now, if there are two antenodal nervures, they fall in one group, and if there are, here you will see, there are more than two antenodal nervures between the base and the node, then they fall in a different group. So this is the first character to be seen in the wing of a damselfly to divide them into two different groups. Okay, and then there are many more characters, and we will see one at a time. Okay, some of the characters that you need to see, and when you just look at them, you will be able to tell the family. Now, in case of this family, Chlorokyphidae, which includes Rhinokypha, Libellargo, Heliokypha, basically stream rubies, river Heliodor, where the abdomen is shorter than the wings. If you see that the abdomen is shorter than the wings, you immediately know that it belongs to the family Chlorokyphidae. Okay, so this is one character that you always have to remember. Okay, this is a little complicated, but there is a nervure called the anal vein, or it's also short form, it's called IA. Now, the presence and absence of this nervure is an important character in, again, dividing this into families. So if this is absent or vestigial, then it belongs to a certain group, and if it is present, it belongs to another group. So this is another character that you need to see in the wings of the damselfly. Okay, so this is a very interesting group, which includes all the stream glory or the forest glories. Now, one of the group which does not have the pterostigma. Okay, it doesn't have the wing spot, um, and it says that the wings are not stalked. Now, I'll just go back and show you what stalked wing mean. Okay, now if you see here, up to here, the wing is in a straight line, and then it starts expanding. So it looks like a stalk. So when the wings are of this shape, they are called as stalked wings. Whereas if you look at this here, the wings are not stalked. They kind of start expanding from the base itself. Okay, so this is an important character to see for this particular family, the Calopterigidae, which includes Vestalis, Apicalis, Vestalis, Gracilis, Neurobasis chinensis, which is the stream glory. Okay, so wings are not stalked and they have predominant green colors. The next one, I think, again was discussed yesterday. This is a group which rest with their wings partially open. Okay, now those are called spread wings, or they belong to the family called Lestidae. Okay, it's a very clear-cut character to be seen. So if you see a damselfly with its wings partially open, perched, then you know that it belongs to the family Lestidae. And of course, they have a very peculiar shape of anal appendages. Another beautiful group, the Euphaidae, which includes the torrent darts. Here also the wings are not stalked, and you can very clearly see it here. The wings are not stalked, and in this is a very interesting character where the hind wing is shorter than the forewing. So that is a character of this family, and you can very clearly see it here that the hind wing is shorter than the forewing. So this is a character of the torrent darts, Euphia, Dispar, Cardinalis, Dysphaea, Ithella, all the Euphaidae, the torrent darts. And this is another very interesting group called the reed tails, Platystichtidae. Now, in this, the abdomen is very long and slender, and in some cases, it is twice the length of the wings. The abdomen is very, very long, very slender, and sometimes twice the length of the wings. And one of the most interesting character of this family is this. Look at the end of the wings. It's like it's little notched. The wing tips are bent at the apex. If you observe closely, you'll see that they are slightly bent. Okay, so this is the character of the reed tails. Right. So I think, of course, there are quite a few families, and it's not possible to go into each and every one. But some of the important ones we have tried to show you here. So now let's look at some interesting and similar looking species. One of the most common species that we have, these are the copperas, the bush darts. Now, these are the adults on top, and they look pretty similar. I mean, even a trained eye will not be able to separate the two species if they see it from a distance. They are, of course, very small in shape, I mean, in size. The only confirmed way to show them, separately, differentiate them, is to look at the anal appendage. Now, listen to this carefully. The one on top that you see is called the superior anal appendage, and the one below is the inferior. Okay. Now, in case of the Coppera vittata, or the blue bush dart, the superior is nearly half the length of the inferior. Whereas in case of Coppera marginipis, which is the yellow bush dart, the superior is 1/4 or even less than the size of the inferior. Now, this is the only conclusive way to separate these two species. So when you see this species in the field, and you're taking a picture, it will be always good to take a close-up or a good picture, which will help you zoom on to the anal appendage. If you do that, then the species level identification is very, very easy. Oh, there are a lot of species, blue colored species, red color species that we see around. Now, here I have put the names because, I can't ask you in the format that we are following. But these are two different species. This is Orthotrum glaucum, and this is Orthotrum luzonicum, tricolored marsh hawk, and this is the blue marsh hawk. Now, what are the characters to be seen? They look pretty similar, blue in color. The shape and size is also very same. It's the same genus. Now, a couple of characters that we need to look at. One is the eye color. In case of Orthotrum glaucum, the eyes are dark in color, whereas in case of luzonicum, they are pale blue. They are pale. Same is the case with the face. Now, if you look closely here, the face is dark, whereas if you look here, the face is pale. If you see these two characters, you will immediately be able to separate these two similar looking species. Okay, that is the Orthotrum glaucum and Orthotrum luzonicum. Right. Now these are the red looking species, and I have one more slide of similar looking species. Now this is Orthotrum prunosum, and this is Orthotrum crisis. Again, on-field identification is easy if you know what you are looking for. Look at the thorax color here. It is dark, whereas here the thorax color is light. Also, look at the eye color. This is bluish green. This is it's grayish. And the face here is dark. It's got black on the face. Here the face is pale. It's reddish. Okay. So if you see these 2-3 characters, you should be able to easily separate. Okay. So these are the red colored ones. 3 more. Again, it's very interesting when you have an audience sitting in front of you and ask them to name these, but we can't do it here. So I have the names for you here on the left. I'll speak about the character. This is Crocothemis cervilia. The one character that should be seen here is the black line on top of the abdomen. A prominent black line will tell this species apart from all the other red colored species. This is Urothemis signata. It has this dark wing basis, quite dark compared to these. Okay, and at the end of the abdomen, okay, it has these black spots on I think the 7th or the 8th and the 9th abdominal segment. Okay, it has prominent black spots, and the legs, if you observe, are black in color, whereas in case of Crocothemis cervilia, they're light in color. Okay, so this is how you separate these 2 species. The third one is Rhodothemis rufa. Now here there is a prominent white line on top of the thorax that will easily tell you this species from all other and can be identified from a distance as well. So it might look red in color, but this white prominent line on the top of the thorax tells it apart. So this is how you separate these similar looking red colored species. I think there are more. Okay, we have 2 more species here. These are I think the white dartlet and the milky dartlet. Again, very similar looking, quite usually mistaken as similar. This is Agarocnemis pyrrhis, the white dartlet, and this is the one below is Agarocnemis lacteola, that is the milky dartlet. Now, the one character to separate them is the markings on the abdomen. Pyrrhis will have black markings on top of the abdomen, whereas lacteola will not have them. Okay, it's completely white. So this is how you separate these 2 similar looking species. Now again, this might visually look like 2 different species, and originally I too was mistaken and I thought the one below was Agarocnemis femina, but it is not. Both are Agarocnemis pygmy. The one on top is a typical male, whereas the one below is old male, or what we refer to as prunosed male. Okay, the bluish color that you see on the thorax is a prunescence that grows on adult males, and it makes it look different from the typical male. So I too was mistaken when I took this picture, but they are the same species. Now we come to the females. But this is again Agarocnemis pygmy. The one below is the typical female, whereas the one below is the the red colored female. So we have sexual dimorphism in females, but we also have different morphs or different forms, and this is a taxonomist's nightmare, because females are very difficult to identify because we do not have keys. And like probably if Balasar is listening, he'll tell you how difficult females are. Right, and then something interesting. We have andromorphic females. That means a female will have its true form, like what we see here. The one below is a typical female. Then there is the light colored or the the red colored female, and then we have a female which looks exactly like the male. Okay, these are andromorphs, or andro is male, morph is the type. So the one which looks like the female is called the andromorph. Now, of course, there are different theories as to why a female should look like a male, and that's probably for some other day, or maybe when Neha speaks about behavior, why it happens that in nature, uh, when you have a typical female, you would also need to have uh, a female which looks like the male. So, that's for some other day probably. But we do have them, and then it makes identification on the field, a little difficult. Okay, now this is a very interesting case study for me personally, because all these years I thought this was Mirogompus longistigma, and very recently, before and during Vivek's comparative slides, this turns out that this is Mirogompus tamaracharensis. Okay, and longistigma I have not seen yet, though it's found in the same habitat. Okay, unfortunately, I couldn't load Vivek's slides on the presentation, but they are there on the Facebook group for everybody to see. Please look at them and you'll see what the differences are. In case of longistigma, the yellows on the thorax and the abdomen are much more prominent, whereas in case of this species, they're not as prominent as longistigma. Whereas the anal appendages, look pretty similar. There are certain slight differences, but the abdominal and the thoracic markings tell this species separately. And then there is, of course, Heliogomphus, which again, these two species, the Mirogompus and Heliogomphus, are usually mistaken in the field to be same species, because also their anal appendages are pretty similar. But I'll show you now the close-ups to separate them. So one on the left is Mirogompus, which are typically horn-shaped. Okay, these are like horns of a kettle. These also look very similar, but if you look at them closer, you will see that the apex are bent. Okay, so this is Heliogomphus for you. So on the left is Mirogompus, and on the right is Heliogomphus. Like I said earlier, anal appendages help you in clearly separating genus and of course similar looking species. So it's very important to look at the anal appendages very closely. And it's possible to take good close-up pictures like what you see here on your screen are not microscope images, but images with normal macro lenses. Again, from the Aeshnidae family, we have two genuses, Anax and Gynacantha. Now again, people sometimes confuse between them, but one of the ways to separate Anax and Gynacantha is that, of course, Anax are much more sturdier in the way they look, whereas Gynacantha are much more slender. But look at the wing base. Anax here, the wing base is not angulated or notched like in Gynacantha. So if you look at the wing base, you will immediately be able to tell whether it's an Anax or Gynacantha. So this is one character, and of course, then you can look at anal appendages. Gynacantha have very typical anal appendages, very long and slender superiors. Okay, so this is one way, and this is of course on the left is the Anax, typical Anax anal appendage. So if you look at anal appendages, you will be able to clearly separate these two genuses. Right. So I think probably I'm coming to the end of the presentation. What we need to do when we are on the field is, this is an example of that. When you are photographing, it's very important to photograph a species from all the sides, and especially the characters that we need to see. So like you see here, it's important to have a very clear lateral image. Then you need to have an image of the face. Then a good image with a contrasting background to be able to see the wing venations, and the dorsal and the lateral image of the anal appendages. If you are collecting a species, of course, for which you need permissions, then of course you can get them back to your lab and take pictures. But if you're doing it on the field, if you're photographing them on the field, then this is something that you have to be mindful of. If you're able to do this, what you see on the screen, you should be able to identify your species quite comfortably. Okay, so this is advise going forward when you're photographing, see that you photograph all the different characters. Right. I think this probably is the last slide, and I think we are good on time for some more discussions. Yes. So that's it from me. Pankaj.
Okay, Parag, thanks a
Hello.
lot. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm
Yes,
switching
So
to.
very nice.
if I can just add, I think I've kind of rushed through. It is not something that usually we do. This kind of a webinar, but
Yeah,
because it's very usually interactive in the way we handle this.
yeah,
But yes, so we can now look at the questions.
yeah, definitely. So we have Dr. Raymond Andrew joining us. He has been answering many
Oh,
questions, and we have David Raju who is also answering. And
Great.
let me tell you, Parag, you were busy with the lecture, but Bala sir laughed loudly when you cracked that joke about the females.
I can imagine. I can
So,
imagine.
so for the viewers, let me just recite the joke. So Parag mentioned that females are very complicated, and he mentioned it in terms of adult taxonomy, adult ordinary taxonomy. It's an inside joke which is meant for Bala sir. So he reacted with the emojis. So I think we are good to take some questions. Neha is
Yeah.
helping
Sure,
us
sure.
compile some questions.
So I have
Maybe
that
I can
question.
switch off. Yeah, yeah.
No, no,
I can
Parag, you have
switch
to
off.
be here.
If no. I'm
Let
just
it be.
joking.
Let it be.
Okay.
If Dr. Andrew and David are here, I think I can switch off.
Okay.
So
So
first question was by Abhishek Das.
Mhm.
I think already it was answered, but how many times they mold to reach the adult stage from the larval stage? So
I think you are in a better position to answer that.
yeah, actually Andrew sir already answered that at least 10 to
Okay.
13 times it may mold. So it depends on the species and the habitat it is present in. So food availability, temperature, and microhabitats, everything play the role in the in case of emergence. So generally, in case of species that are breeding in perennial ponds and in hilly mountain area, so they have longer uh, larval lifespan, and they generally molt up to recorded it is up to 15 times. And generally those which are breeding in monsoon pools, generally they have very less time to emerge, so they can emerge maybe after 7 to 8 molts.
Right. And
And
if my experience is that,
hmm,
yeah, sorry. So my experience is that probably damselflies have shorter breeding periods, compared to dragonflies. So damselflies
yes.
tend to emerge much faster than dragonflies.
Yes, and funny thing is the dragon damselfly, that is the Anisozygoptera, that is actually having the longest larval lifespan. That there are studies that can be more than 15 years.
Wow. And I think just for everybody's information, the original description of Epiopilivia was based on a larva.
Yes, and most of the studies are done on the larval stages only. And many years actually after long years of the description, actually people got to see the adult. Okay, so the next question was absence of pterostigma in case of this Calopterigidae. So does it affect the flight of the stream glories? So Pankaj already answered that question a bit, but still, if you want to add something.
Yeah, so I don't know what Pankaj answered, but I think these are
Okay, I'll just.
weak flyers. They are weak flyers, and they fly very
Should I
low
repeat
to the
Pankaj's
ground.
answer? Should I repeat
Yes,
Pankaj's
please.
answer?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Sure, sure.
So each species has got different flying habits and capacities. Stream glories are localized to rocky streams and their flights are shorter. Also, the
Correct.
color are a part of sexual selection, a very interesting phenomenon. For example, peacock jewel male So because of burdens of peacock males, peacock in case of birds. So he is telling that because of burden of feathers, they become bulky and easy prey for predators, but they survive instead of that lack, that handicap. So and that handicap hypothesis he has actually enumerated. So now you
Okay.
can add something on that.
Okay. No, I think that's what I was also going to say, that they are weak flyers and very locally. I mean, they're localized, so they don't probably need the use of pterostigma in terms of balancing or reducing drag. So in that sense, I think sometimes if they have it, it could actually end up being a hindrance. So it's probably they're happy without it.
And the presence of pterostigma and absence of pterostigma, it's actually a evolutionary question. And there are studies that some of the families, they have very long and strong pterostigma braced with
Yes.
proper veins, and some families they don't have. So in evolutionary way, actually it is changing. So gradually the wing have developed this pterostigma, and some of the species they have lost it secondarily. So it is
Correct.
actually a evolutionary process. It's not only for one species or like that.
Correct. So with strong flyers, they are they are braced, or
Yes.
they are thickened. Yes.
Yes, and mostly old world, like old species, old families, they are mostly having strong and braced pterostigma, like asnids. Some
And snakes,
asnids
for
they have.
example. Yes, snakes. Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yes, snakes. Correct.
So Tahir was asking, uh, he was asking about a cryptic species, Crocothemis erythrea and Crocothemis cervilia. So he needs help to identify, differentiate between them.
अच्छा. Okay. So Tahir bhai, I mean, Cervilia तो हर जगह देखा है यार. Erythrea I have not seen yet. So I won't really be able to uh, help you there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe
So
Subramanian
yeah.
sir,
So if somebody,
he can
yes,
help.
somebody who's seen probably should comment on it. I
Yes.
have not seen
And
Erythrea yet.
actually, I have seen some specimens that was identified as Erythrea, and the key says that the Erythrea doesn't have the long continuous black line on its abdomen. So it is
Okay.
restricted to the greater crimson glider, that is the Eurothemis signata. It is also restricted to the hind part of the
Last
abdomen.
segment.
Yeah,
Also, I think
but
there is a
as I
difference in
have,
the wing patch.
there is, but
There is a
it
difference.
depends
Yes.
on the age and all. So as I have not also seen the exact specimen in field, so I can't properly say.
Okay, Tahir bhai, maybe I will, now that you have asked this question, I'll try and explore and maybe get back to you.
Okay, some of the questions are already answered in the chat box, like how to differentiate
Okay.
between andromorph and male. So you already told that only the genitalia
Yes.
is the
Yes.
option. And
Correct.
David
Correct.
Raju was asking if Parag, if do you have both the Merogomphus in Goa?
Okay. Now, the one that I thought was Longistigma is not Longistigma anymore, but it has been cited in Amboli, Longistigma. So I'm sure it's there. And this monsoon, I'll find it out for you. But it's there. I'm sure it's there because it shares the same habitat. That's what says as well. And it's been photographed from Amboli, so I'm sure it's there in Goa.
Okay. So, okay, another question is there. Are discoidal cells present in damselfly wings?
Yes, of course they are present. Did we show them? Yeah, I mean, I don't know whether,
I
okay,
think
they are not.
you already
Yes,
showed
I
them,
think
but it is not the same shape
it is
with
not
the
triangle.
duct, right?
It's not triangular.
It's not
Yeah,
triangle.
it's four-sided. It's four-sided. It's four-sided. Yes, it's not triangular. It's
Uh,
four-sided.
you can actually check in the Fraser's book, that is the first volume of Fraser's book of Indian Odonata, that is actually having the wing venations description and all. So there you will get the exact drawings.
Okay, I
So,
can put it up on the screen as well if you want.
yeah, please share
Yeah.
the.
Okay.
And Pankaj, please.
Pankaj will have to
Allow
do that
the,
probably.
yeah, Pankaj, please
Pankaj, can
allow.
you?
Pankaj, are you there? Okay, he has done it.
Okay.
Yes.
Yes. So, okay. So here, this is what you see is the
Can you zoom it?
uh, zoom. I don't know how to do that here. Sorry.
Okay.
Just a second. Okay. So here it's, if you can see it, it says DC. Okay. So this is the discoidal cell and it's got 4 sides. Doesn't have 3 sides like the, um, the dragonflies. And I think it will be, so the dragonfly has 3 sides. Whereas, just a second, where did it go? Okay. Here, this is 4-sided. This one. So it's very clearly 4-sided. This is the discoidal cell of the damselfly.
If you want to zoom, actually, you can
Okay.
zoom it from the PDF file.
Okay.
Okay. So, okay, one more question. It's a long question,
Sure.
actually. Are the genitalia in both dragon and damselflies present on the second abdominal segment? And that is, if that is the only character to differentiate between adult dragonflies and damselflies.
Yes, yes. I mean, all the males will have secondary genitalia on the second abdominal segment, and that is where the mating wheel gets completed. If you observe the mating wheel that gets created, so the male with its anal appendages holds the prothorax of the female, and the female will bend her abdomen to get onto the hold on to the secondary genitalia where the sperm packets are then transferred. So both in case of dragonflies and damselflies, they will have secondary genitalia on the second abdominal segment.
Okay, Kaushik Ghosh is asking, do the teneral males possess well-marked secondary genitalia? If not, then how to identify them? Teneral males.
Sorry, I couldn't. I'm sorry. There was no.
Okay,
The
so
males will have secondary genitalia opening. Yeah. So whether it's a teneral or adult male, the secondary genitalia will be present on the second abdominal segment. So that's the
actually,
most conclusive way of differentiating.
Actually, in
Hello?
case of teneral males, it is more clear and it is properly visible because like from the beginning of the stretching of the abdomen, the secondary genitalia will be visible.
Correct.
Okay, so Pankaj, do you see any other question?
Well,
Okay.
one question by Kaushik Ghosh, I can read it up.
Yes.
There are multiple common names for a lot of species which can cause confusion sometimes. Hence, it is best to use both common name and scientific name. Oh, I think I just read a answer to a question. So the question was why we use common names and why most of the odontologists use scientific names and not common names. So
Oh,
I just read the answer. Okay.
yeah. Yeah. Also, I think many do not have common names. While some may have multiple common names, many still do not have common names at all. So that kind of complicates it more. But I mean, there have been past examples, even with birds, butterflies, where change in common names have confused people. So the scientific names are not going to change until someone does a revision, okay, a proper published revision. So it's always good to follow the scientific nomenclature.
Okay, there is a question by Vivek Chandran. He is asking, are
Uh-huh.
Idionyx species still considered under family Chordulidae or do they come under the separate family Synthemistidae?
Yeah, okay. So that's something that I'm not. I mean, right now for me, they're still under Cordulidae.
Mhm.
So yeah, but some of the revised taxonomy considers it to be a separate family. But yeah, so we have described one Idionyx from Goa, and for me, it's still under Cordulidae.
Okay, Tahir has another question. Do we have anything like pseudomales?
Pseudomales? No,
I
I mean, I
think
am not sure
I
I
about
think he's
if somebody else can answer.
I think he's referring to
he's I think
andromots,
okay, maybe.
because that is what I mean. That might be the most closely associated, the term for
Yeah,
andromots, pseudomales.
Hmm.
yeah,
They
Possibly.
I've
appear
never
as if
heard
they are
that
males, but they
word
are
being
not.
used in odonates. Possibly,
Okay, then I
possibly.
don't know.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I've never
Uh,
used. I mean, I've never used or rather heard that word being used in while referring to odonates. So I'm not too sure.
there is a
Okay.
very interesting question. How to remember dragonfly scientific names?
Okay. Maybe I don't. Okay, so that's so start by not remembering common names. So I think that is one way of being forced to remember the scientific names. But I mean there is no formula to it. I frankly I have no answer. It's just that sometimes um, you kind of get a hang of it. Also, it's a little addictive, if you ask me. Once you start using uh, scientific names, you start getting a false sense of superiority. So you kind of start keep on using the scientific names. Yeah, but
Yeah,
I don't know. I don't think there is any prescribed formula.
that's a very smart answer, Parag. In fact, if you are in the crowd of odontologists, you will, keep using scientific names, no
And
common names at all.
actually, there are some meaning for the scientific names. So if you start understanding those meanings, then gradually you will get the names, and you don't need
Yeah,
to remember them. Actually, you will correlate the characters with the names.
yeah, that's true.
Correct.
Okay, so Pranay Bhatnagar is asking primary and secondary genitalia difference on the basis of
Mhm.
function and position. So the same thing, just position and function difference.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I
So I think
I
I've,
think that
I mean, kind
answer
of just
that answer
answered.
yeah, I think
Yes.
yeah. So I think that answer
Hello.
he will find in the behavior talk, where
Huh.
we are going to show the
Okay.
process. So
So now I will ask one question just on behalf of the viewers. So
Okay.
we have learned about the identification of odonates. So where do we start? Like how to start odonating, where to go to see odonates, and what will be my first step towards odonating to see odonates? Like like all the photographs you have shown, most of them are very close photographs, and some of them are the specimens are in your hand. So do I need to catch them, or like how should I start?
Okay. So that's very interesting thing. So one thing is that I think you did not go very far to look for dragonflies. I mean, whether you live in a city or a village or a small water tank is good enough to start looking at dragonflies. Uh, if you are damsel flies will always obviously be there, but you'll have to get onto your knees to look for them. Yes, so I don't think you really have to travel far to look for dragonflies. Any water body is good enough. Secondly, now that most people carry cameras, don't need a very sophisticated camera to take good pictures. what I showed you was, the angles by which you need to take those pictures. So not necessary that they have to be very high-end cameras. These days, the bridge cameras that you get are probably much better than the SLRs for this kind of work. Secondly, I think the tested binoculars are amazing. So you don't need to have a camera as well for dragonflies. Then I still carry a binocular with me when I'm at water bodies. Only if I see something interesting, then I'll get my camera out. But most of the time, it's binoculars that are used. So yeah, I mean, you can start with that, and then pictures help, because then you may not remember everything that you have seen unless you actually make sketches or write down the descriptions. But pictures, yes, pictures will obviously help to ID them later.
And
I
they
don't know
can
whether I
join
have
our Dragonfly South Asia group and share their photograph in our group, so that people can experts can help them identify.
So that is why you asked this question, huh?
No. And one more thing, like if at all they are going for any like students, most MSc students, they go for Odonate collections.
Right. Prosenjit,
Time. So
please.
Prosenjit has a habit of
Yeah, no, I think
getting of,
freezing in
like
between.
cold shocks.
Yeah, can you repeat the question, please?
okay, so the question was, if someone is going for a serious master's project, or like today master degree students, they go for Odonate collection sometime. We see many students, they go for Odonate collection, and they cannot preserve it properly. They collect specimens, but after that they all go in vain. So any suggestions for them, like what to do in field if they are planning for collection, or at all they should collect or not?
Okay, so very, very important. I think good you asked this. I think the first thing is depends on what you want to do. I think you need to ask yourself why you want to collect in the first place. I think if you ask me, most of the common species can be identified without being collected. With good pictures, you can identify most of the common species. Yes, after a certain number, you have to collect if you really are into serious documentation. But then you have to be careful on two fronts. One is that without permissions, please do not collect, especially if it is a protected area. Do not collect without permissions. You might land in trouble with the forest department. So that's very important that you have permissions. Secondly, if you are collecting, it's very, very important that you preserve well. So even before venturing out to collect, learn how to preserve, whether it's wet preservation or dry preservation. Practice and see that you are very good at it before you start and go bulk collecting. Maybe collect a few and practice your pinning, practice your preservations, be confident about it, and then only maybe go and collect. And after you have collected, I think the most important part is to collect all the data relevant to that particular specimen, because your specimen without relevant data of where it was collected, when it was collected, is of no use to anybody, because you will complete your masters in couple of years, and then that specimen will remain in your college or whichever institution you belong to, and then hopefully somebody else comes and works on it. But without that data, that specimen is absolutely of no use. So it's important that we follow some ethics when we are collecting, and maybe join our yearly what is this meets to learn how to do that.
Okay, that's all. No other questions. Thank you, Parag.
Great,
Okay,
great. So thank you everybody, thank you so much.
Thank you, Parag, for this wonderful talk. We have got many compliments on our WhatsApp as well as Facebook group. Thank you, Prasenjit, for supporting, being in the supporting role today. So tomorrow, again, we meet at the same time, 5:30 p.m. at the same place, Facebook Dragonfly South Asia group. And next time, that is tomorrow, Prasenjit will be presenting on larval Odonata taxonomy. So again, it's going to be a feast because he has many pictures he will share with you, many videos in which you will get to see the behavior of larvae and how to identify them. So let me again tell you that thanks all for participating in the live streaming. Yesterday we started Dragonfly South Asia virtual meeting 2020. This is the first time we are conducting such a meeting. Yesterday's lecture we had so far 385 views, so that's a really tremendous amount that we have reached to, and around 293 comments and some 197 likes. So thank you all for your support. I hope for today's lecture as well we can give you statistics by tomorrow. So this is the Dragonfly South Asia virtual meeting 2020. It is in association with South Asian Council of Odonatology and Society for Odonate Studies. So we will take your leave now. We will meet again tomorrow 5:30 p.m. at the same place with new speakers. Okay, thank you all. Thank you, Parag. Thank you, Prasenjit.
Thank you. Thank you.
I request you to log off now. Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye. Bye, everybody. See you.